Sidebar, a frank discussion on the law, life, and liberty. Sponsored by the LaHood Norton Law Group. And now, your objection sustained. Your hosts, Karen Klaus and former Bexar County District Attorney, Nico LaHood.
1200 WOAI. This is Sidebar with former Bexar County DA Nico LaHood, trial lawyer, managing partner of LaHood Norton Law Group, and George Aruzzo, scholar, former chemist, pharmaceutical researcher, and director. This week, we finally saw Donald Trump, our president, indicted following an investigation of what I've heard 100 times in the news called hush money, a hush money payment scheme. But in the meantime, after that announcement, President Trump hauled in about $4 million in fundraising after that announcement.
Well, so did Adam Schiff. I mean, this is what everyone does. I mean, but President Trump should, and I'm not going to say former President Trump, because no one says that to Obama, no one says that to President Clinton or President Bush or President Carter. So I don't know why we know why, but he should. This is unprecedented. We can dissect this today. I've had, this is really a black eye in our country. I think it's embarrassing to us on the world stage. I think it absolutely relegates us to a banana republic. People use that term, and we've used it preemptively. Not we, meaning people and commentators have used it preemptively. But when you think about a banana republic, you think about king of the mountain. I do. Whoever's on the mountain makes the rules up. And you're going to do anything to get to the king of the mountain. Pull hair, pull shirts, trip, whatever, hit, punch. And that's what happens. And then you make up the rules. And there's no set of standards or principles that you live by anymore. And they're constantly changing, so you don't know what mark to go. You miss the mark because you don't know what the mark is anymore. That is officially a banana republic. And how does the United States on the world stage tell any third world country, hey, you're wrong. You're doing this wrong. That's immoral. Well, look what you guys are doing over there. Look at your kids. Look at your schools. Look at your political parties. Look, you're prosecuting your former political enemies. Don't talk to me about what's right and wrong in your morals. Keep your morals to yourself. We've lost credibility. Not because we have a very, I think, elderly, sick man as president. It's sad for him and his family. It's really shameful what they're doing to him, and he brings no confidence or exudes any confidence or leadership on the world stage. But because our morals are completely bankrupt.
So,
Just the beginning. Dershowitz had just said he's never seen such an egregious case of prosecutorial abuse in something like a half a century of practicing and teaching law. And far be it from me to give advice to the former Harvard University law professor emeritus, or maybe he's still a current professor. I'm not really sure what his status is there. But I will tell Mr. Dershowitz that he hasn't seen anything yet. He always throws in that he is absolutely legally on Trump's side here. I'm paraphrasing. He didn't say that, but that's, if you read his statements, you can see that that's where the thrust of his view is, that Trump is being maltreated here legally. But he always throws in that, and this
I'm not voting for him.
Yeah, this is speaking from someone who hasn't voted for him twice. Fair enough. But what he's failing to recognize, and I don't know that maybe that's a strong statement. Maybe he does grasp the fact that this isn't mommy and daddy's Democrat Party anymore. I'm going to keep saying it over and over and over again because that's what this is. These are communists dressed up as Democrats. Yeah. These are absolute communists. My question isn't, why in the world would they indict a former president? This has never happened, totally unprecedented. Why wouldn't they? These are people led by Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris, who openly support child mutilation and castration. They're totally okay with gay porn in K through 6 schools. They think it's a great idea for mentally ill, deranged, delusional men to go into girls' locker rooms. They think regularly exposing little children to the depravity of drag queens, that's a really good, wholesome thing to do. Why in the world wouldn't they prosecute a president? Why? These people are all about power. They will degenerate a country to its basest level and confuse society They'll do whatever it takes to get power. Trump is standing in their way. He is the firewall, and they're going to go after him. And this isn't going to stop here. This is the beginning of prosecutorial abuse. We got what, Nico? 19 months or so until the election. They're just getting started. And we best get ready for this. We better see unity in the House and the Senate with regard to the GOP. We better see it. If it doesn't happen, these guys are going to steamroll their way into another 2024 election win. And it's not like, what do they always say? This is the most important election in the history of our republic.
Probably is.
I think it's the final. How's that? I think it's the actual final meaningful election. That's what I think. Because these guys have centralized power to the extent where I don't know how, as Tucker Carlson said this week, how do we come back from this moment? How do we do that? I'm sorry to start the show on such a dim note, but I want to be, I'm not a pessimist, but I am a realist. And I refuse to recognize what's happening in front of us. And that's exactly what's happening in front of us.
Well, Karen, George said a lot, and I want you to lead us on the conversations where you want us to go. I mean, he talked about the indictment. We need to dissect that, the indictment. He alluded to, he didn't say it, but I mean, he talked about this transgender ideology it's completely out of control. And then and you can be passionate about it. I was on the men's Bible study on Wednesday. I mean, I was impassioned to say the least. I mean, forget about being R-rated. I was bold. I mean, it was hard. It burdens my heart, because if we don't think that Christians are now officially, publicly, and openly persecuted, just look at the way that Nashville shooting has been treated and handled.
Just what I was going to bring up.
I figured you were. I mean, just think about that. So I know that's another topic we have to talk about. Think about how that's been, almost the Christians are being blamed. Does anybody have any doubt? I mean, I guess I have to hold back a little bit. I cannot divorce myself from my legal mindset, and I want to actually see the evidence. But we have a manifesto. We know exactly why this lady, murdered those babies and those adults in a Christian school. She used to attend there. We know exactly. This is not. No one has to wonder anymore. Matter of fact, she texted a good friend of hers. Is like, over time, you'll see. I left more than enough evidence. She did. I mean, she did. No doubt about that. But yet we don't know about it. Why? And for the White House press secretary to talk about how trans people they're being persecuted. I don't know where they're being persecuted. And that's not I cannot stand being snarky or condescending when people try to be overly. Look, let's just talk. Let's look at evidence objectively. Let's take every piece of evidence, but depending on what the issue is, let's analyze it and critically think through it, and then we'll come to a conclusion and have a debate or a discussion about it. I want to see the evidence of that. I don't see the evidence of that. Are you saying because people are resisting drag queen shows to kids? Well, then your definitions are different than mine. Are you saying because we don't want children to be mutilated, as George is saying, because I want a child worried about unicorns and playing, cowboys and Indians or Wonder Woman and Superman, and not worrying about being over-sexualized and talking about, heterosexual or homosexual sex or any sexualization. They don't even have the hormones to understand it or the mental or mindset. I mean, where are we going with this? So that needs to be dissected. So we got Trump indictment, Karen, and I'll let you take over from here. Trump indictment, we have the Nashville shooting, we have this transgender ideology going on. I mean, that's plenty to dissect, and all of it has a grave effect on whether this country is going to be this country moving forward.
One of the things that George just said is that some of these topics, when it comes to drag queens and transgender, it is confusing society, and it is putting a big question mark above my head, because when they announced these Nashville murders, first they said it was a trans male, then a trans female, then they wouldn't say, then they said a man, then they said a woman, and I was confused. And that in itself, whether it was a man or a woman, got me thinking, well, who did it, and why is everybody tiptoeing around this instead of talking about these 6 people that were murdered, including those 3 children?
Well, it just tells you the fear-based. I mean, it was very confusing. We didn't know if this was a biological woman, a woman that presented, a man that presented it. I mean, look, this has never been an issue in our country before, and this is why, and I said this to my wife yesterday, this is why the bathroom debate was so important back then. Remember the bathroom debate? And how many people blew off, you guys who cares? It's the bathroom. I said, well, why do you care then? It's not a country club. I mean, just go in there and either squat or stand up, take a leak or whatever you're going to do, drop a bomb, and get the hell out of there. What are you doing? I mean, you're not hanging out in there. But there was something deeper there. Look at this. Because it went from the bathrooms, and you guys are overreacting, and what's wrong with you? And then remember that the basketball tournament was moved, and everyone was taking a stand, and then you had a dividing line on that. And then it went into sports. It actually went into sports. And biological men were kicking the crap out of women in sports. And I don't know where the women activists were, where were the feminist movements, where is this, I am woman, hear me roar, because that and I'm not being sarcastic, I'm repeating what I've heard over the years. I mean, where were they at? Because a woman is fearfully and wonderfully made, and they're unique and they're honest, and we should celebrate womanhood just like we should celebrate manhood. And then there's a complementary role between a man and a woman. I mean, that's a biblical prescription. I'm very open about my faith, but it's also a common sense. It's also a scientific prescription to multiplication and to societies. And we know that a woman can do what a woman can do and a man cannot do, and a man can do what a man can do and a woman cannot do. And they weren't designed to. They're designed to work complementary together. But it went into sports, and then now it's going into children. And so where does it end? And so people have got to objectively, passionately if you want to, but courageously take stands. And there's people, I promise you, the vast majority of people do not agree with this. And one thing that we didn't say, I don't know if I sent you the video, Karen. Someone sent it to me. I don't know if you saw what happened in the Texas Capitol.
I did not.
There was a lay down, lay in, a chanting, people yelling, flicking off the cameras.
A die-in.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I don't know what it's called. And it happened in Tennessee also, I believe.
Kentucky?
Kentucky. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. This is
storming of capitals. Yeah. Plowing state troopers over. I don't see anything in the legacy media about an insurrection. It seems to kind of walk and talk and smell like an insurrection, but don't hear anything about that. Anything that advances power for them is completely moral and legitimate. If it gets in the way, then you're a white supremacist, then you're an insurrectionist, you're a violent extremist, et cetera, et cetera. See how this works?
And don't forget, we have to talk about gun control also, Karen.
This is Sidebar with Nico LaHood, Georgia Rougeau. We'll be right back. This is Sidebar. Please go to sidebartv.com. Remember that we are on Facebook during the radio show, and then after the show, we continue with Facebook Live. We love to have your comments and questions, and I haven't even talked to you guys yet, but there's a new feature that we're going to get where people can call in during this show and ask questions, and not live, but they'll be given to us by Kurt. Kurt, do you know that? You're going to have to start working for it. Yeah, look, he says no. But sidebartv.com, and then after the show, of course, Facebook Live, but you can get all of the links at sidebartv.com. Nico, you mentioned something, and it made me think. You said, why is it, like, where are the women? Why are they not standing up for women's, rights, and where... And every time you say that, and any topic like the insurrections you were talking about or the incidents at the Capitol, I think maybe they are happening, but they're just not being covered. I mean, is that a possibility that when there's a story like the Nashville murders, some of the aspects of the shooting are not highlighted, are not covered in the story because it doesn't belong in the agenda, it doesn't belong in the story that the media wants to tell?
I don't think that's the case, because these advocacy groups didn't have a problem getting on in front of the camera before, so I don't think they, and especially with on Facebook, and you can kind of create your own movement, and you can't tell me that people wouldn't cover a very strong and passionate women's movement group or women's advocacy group that wants to speak out against this, especially when it came to the sports or comes to all this,
I have seen the swimmer tell her side of the story just, once or twice.
She's not a representative of a group, though. She's an athlete and she's a woman, so she has every right to talk about it, by the way. But I'm talking about these groups, these advocacy
what you're talking
groups.
about.
So I don't know where they're at, to be honest with you. It's I don't know if it's fear-based. I don't know. I don't understand it. I don't know who's tried to reach out to them, but where are they at? Womanhood is being completely erased. Mm-hmm. Well, it's being completely erased. Someone sent me a picture. It was what was the name? Honey something. I don't remember the name of the company. And it was a female woman spray for infections or whatever, like skin rashes and stuff. And then on the back of it said, "Made by humans with vaginas for humans with vaginas, because it takes one to know one." That's on the back of their product. I mean, it's crazy.
I can't even laugh.
I mean, you kind of chuckle. I chuckled when I saw it. But I mean, the fact that you even have to say that is insane. The fact that Kindergarten Cop, and I bring that up all the time, would never be put in a movie now, where that little kid goes up to Arnold Schwarzenegger and says, "Boys have penises, girls have vaginas." No kidding, kid. I mean, but and that was fun. Back then we laughed. Oh, he's realizing it early at 5 years old, and now we're completely turning that upside down. You have to ask yourself, why? What is the goal? Have you thought about that? What are we doing here? I mean, what? I mean, and they're actually so aggressive about it. If you look at this, I mean, there's no conversation. But the narrative is you're the one under attack, so arm yourselves. That's what's happening recently now. And people in the transgender movement, arm yourself. Well, you're right to arm. You have a right to arm yourself. I don't have selective Second Amendment, protections. I mean, as long as you're not a convicted felon and you're not mentally unstable, that's a different discussion, or a member of a gang, well, then you should legally be able to get a gun. But this movement is extremely harmful. It's illogical when you break it down. So you're saying there's no distinct men and women, but I'm transitioning to a woman or to a man. What you just said, what are you transitioning from and to when there's no definitions? I mean, it falls on its head when you think about that. And then you think about nature, and you think about science and biology and reproduction. I mean, we can go so, and the fact that the children are just being drawn into this, and we're the parents is what I want to know. And you know that there's people on the Democrat side, because I don't know why this is just labeled a Republican or conservative issue. There's plenty of independents and Democrats, I assure you. Atheist, Christian, Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist. There's just people that say BS. But it's fear. And George mentioned this, I think, a month ago. They're self-censoring themselves.
Wow. Most of the time I agree literally with what you say. But, brother, you use the word harmful. These people aren't just harmful. They're terrorists. I mean, they're committing acts of violence. This is why I always say, if they're complaining about it, they're doing it. And somehow the legacy media does look the other way. It's fascinating to me. You're right. I can't think of any national feminist movement that has spoken out against them. That's a tragedy. There have been documented instances overseas. I'm thinking in Paris, France, and in Auckland, New Zealand, there were demonstrations by feminist groups, and they were shut down by pro-trans militant groups. I know that. I try to keep track of international news. I have lots of family over there and have occasion to do that, but I haven't seen that same outrage here, Nico, and that's a great question. Where is the National Organization for Women? While women are being deleted at record time by these pro-trans terrorists, it's exactly what they are. And why is the media not reporting on this, Karen? That's an important question. Again, there's a narrative that they support. This is a marriage between a left-wing government, left-wing media, and now left-wing institutions, and they're all on the same page. And if something is pushing their narrative, then it's moral and it's okay. If something resists it, then out come the labels and the marginalizations. And then you see a deployment of the Department of Justice, right? You've seen this at pregnancy centers. You've seen it for anti-abortion demonstrators or sidewalk counselors. There's a clear two-tiered system of justice. And I'm proposing that this is only going to get exacerbated. It's only going to get worse because there really isn't much of a pushback from our lawmakers. That's what I'm wondering, Nico. Where are our elected representatives? I mean, this is a critical moment.
And Karen, this is why Georgia, and I'm not trying to bring this up, but I don't know people that saw this or not when we talked about this 3 or 4 weeks ago, why people like Frank Rodriguez is important. Because here's a man that lives out the gay lifestyle. He identifies himself as a homosexual male, but he says, I'm a male, I'm a man, that's it. And he doesn't believe the LGBT flag should be in any schools. He says that doesn't represent who I am and my movement. The American flag represents that. And he goes, and there's a large section of us in this community that do not agree with this. And that's why, we were talking about it, going back and forth on why it's important that someone like a Frank Rodriguez, that he was actually on Value Entertainment, I believe. Someone sent me a link. I don't know if it was you, Jeff, or somebody sent me a link that he was on there talking. Yeah. Because it's important. I mean, it's important to have these discussions. That's why if a Democrat or someone that is liberal or left-leaning or progressive that says, wait a minute, I have this is my limitation. I don't agree with this. Well, let's agree on this topic, and we'll go back to disagreeing, which is why I bring up Bill Maher a lot on the show, that I like Bill Maher. I respect him because he wants conversations, because he's not afraid to call out, quote-unquote, his side. And then he models conversations with people that he disagrees with. Now, I disagree with him on the majority of his positions, not all of them. I mean, he obviously doesn't push the transgender movement. He doesn't mind calling out pharma. He can't stand cancel culture. He believes in just free speech and free thought and things of this nature. I mean, so those things I agree with him on. But people need to speak up. The time, but it's not my battle. The time for it's somebody else. The time for go along, get along. We're way past that. Pastors, people, whether you have a podcast or no podcast, you have friends, you have an opinion, school board meetings, and I'm talking about professionally, appropriately letting your opinions be heard, and then ultimately voting appropriately. And then going back to disagreeing on other issues that we can disagree on.
And Christians are going to be definitely in the crosshairs. I see that more.
That's exactly what I want to know.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
Because there's been growing, I guess, calls for the law enforcement to release that manifesto. And some say that may shed light on, motivation and what happened. But others are saying what really should be investigated from that manifesto, is this a hate crime against Christians? And why won't they release this manifesto?
Well, because it probably says they don't want it to get out there. I mean, look, they're saying a lot by not saying anything because everybody wants to know. I mean, the body cam video was out the next day, which I'm glad. And if you haven't seen it, you should see it because it's an example of well-trained,
perfection,
very funded law enforcement versus unfunding them and defunding them, and courageous and supportive. And look, 14 minutes is a long time to be alone with people that are unarmed if you are heavily armed. And so I don't know what happened. I believe it's divine intervention but whatever, that's just my opinion. But you see that, and you see well-trained warriors going into, literally they're being shot at when they got in there. And then she was continuing to shoot outside and
running toward the gunfire. It just
and they used weapons that people want to ban to stop the wrong person. So there's a meme going around this week that a rock in the hands of a bad person killed Abel, but the rock in the hands of a good person killed Goliath. It's not about the rock; it's about the person. And I know this is not where you wanted to talk about gun control, Karen. So you cue me when you want to, but it infuriates me. It really does when the society has this obsession with blaming an object for the person that used it. We don't do that with any other area. We don't do that with alcohol. We don't do that with vehicles. And if you look at the data, George and I were talking about some stats that I had been using since I was in the district attorney and I was in office, and they may be outdated or whatever, but you'll get the point on total alcohol-related deaths in this 1 year when I was in office, either 17 or 18, versus all gun-related deaths, including 60% suicide. It wasn't even close. It was like 30-something thousand for gun-related incidents, and then 80-something thousand for alcohol-related incidents. Now, how they queue and how they categorize alcohol-related incidents versus gun-related, of course, that's always an issue. COVID deaths, remember we talked about that? You passed away from a gunshot and it was a COVID death because you tested positive. So all that matters in data collection. I get that. All I'm saying is nobody's championing to get rid of alcohol. I assure you alcohol does. I mean, whether it's an overdose, whether it's liver disease, all alcohol-related deaths, intox manslaughters, whatever, suicides, negligence, whatever, reckless behavior versus gun-related deaths, including suicide. It wasn't even close.
That was my point to you earlier and while we were texting, that it's actually worse.
It's worse. I was being conservative. George, say the numbers yourself.
I think you were being conservative. If you look at the CDC and the way they break down the numbers, they classify it into acute or chronic death. So if something is an acute death, it would be something that's like immediate. So whether it's a suicide, that comes from overuse of alcohol, or that leads to chronic depression, or severe depression, or whether it's an accident, right? That's instant versus a chronic death that's usually at the feet of some sort of disease, whether it's, pancreatitis or liver disease, cirrhosis of the liver, you name it. And so if you tabulate all of those, it's actually 140,000. It's just over 140,000.
I was saying 88 for years, 88,000 for years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the kinds of deaths that you're talking about, which are more along the lines of chronic, you're looking at about just over 80,000. So everything that's chronic and typically along the lines of disease. But I don't mean this to sound flippant, but who cares? It's a significant amount. I mean, this is truly an epidemic in the sense, certainly relative to this ruse of gun violence, as you always say, does an inanimate object really kill people? I think not. There's an individual, a sick individual, a murderous individual behind that gun that's doing it, and there's no focus on that. Let's focus on the gun.
But do you remember the phrase, people don't kill people? Guns don't kill people. People kill people.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yes.
Guns don't kill people. People kill people, because that campaign was trying to bring it back to the person, the irresponsibleness or the evil or the distortion of someone's mind. I mean, look at Chicago. And so you can look at places where there's no guns or heavy,
violence.
Chicago, New York,
Yes.
all these places, all these gun laws, and there's still tremendous violence. I had a debate with a buddy of mine early in the week, and he leans conservative when it comes to financial issues. He leans left when it comes to social issues. Or I don't know where he's at. I guess after a break we'll talk about that, because I challenged him on something that he had no answer for, and then no one's had answers for. But it goes back to that campaign that we go back years ago, that guns don't kill people, people kill people. And I'll talk to you about that after the break here.
This is Sidebar. Please check us out on sidebartv.com to go to the Facebook Live feed. We'll be right back. WOAI, this is Sidebar with Nico LaHood, George Arujo. I don't know if you wanted to wrap up with talking about gun control before we move on to President Trump.
I can talk hours about it, so I mean, you can never wrap me up on it because I'm just such a passionate advocate of Second Amendment rights and why we have them and what's going on. And I'm also practical about it. That kind of irritates some of my Second Amendment brothers and sisters, but I've been involved in the justice system for 20 years from both sides of it, prosecuting at the highest level, defending at the highest level, and I've seen it play out. I mean, forget about theory. I've seen the theory and the ideas play out in the experiment that, as you know, I say called the justice system, the experiment of ideas and how it interrelates to our lives. But so I was challenging my friend at lunch. And I said, tell me where the most dangerous environment in this country is. Just the most dangerous environment. And he said all these other things. Chicago, no. Give me the most dangerous environment in our country. And there's more than one of them. He didn't have the answer. And I said, prisons. How many guns are in prisons? None. And I said this during the men's Bible study too. I go, but you have toothbrushes that are shaved down into shanks and shoved into people's throats. You have bed springs that are manipulated and made into shanks. You have tuna cans that are placed into socks and used to tear skin off of a skull and crack people's head open. And there's just fists and there's aggression but there's not one gun. But it's a violent environment. So tell me, explain that to me. Explain how you're going to blame guns there because there's not one gun in a prison. So he had no answer, of course. No one ever has answers for that. Again, we don't do it with alcohol. We don't do it with cars. And George and I were talking about, there was someone that shared a data point from allegedly the CDC of deaths of 1 to 17-year-olds. And I don't know if you verified that for me.
They look at, when they break it up by age, I don't have a 1 to 17 bracket.
I guess they
under 21.
I don't know why they said 17, maybe because they were thinking of high school. Yeah. They should have said 1 to 18. But there was like 4,500 deaths. I don't know the year point that they were talking about last year or whatever it was. And they broke it down, either vehicle-related incidents, drugs, guns. And guns was, and I think I'm being conservative, under 400 out of the 4,500. Vehicles were 2,100. 2,100 out of the 45, roughly. And these are rough numbers, so don't anybody, fact check me and say I'm not trying to, whatever. I'm close. Now, who's moving for vehicle? And I told my friend at lunch, what about, my friend has 3 or 4 or 5 cars. I go, how many of your cars go over 90? All of them. All of his cars go 120 or higher. I go, there's not a speed limit in this country that goes 120. Not even 95. What the hell? Why don't we do a recall on cars that have speed limits over 30? Why don't we remanufacture cars? Because remember the magazine argument. Why do you need a magazine that has 30 rounds? Why do you need a car that goes 120? Why do you need a motorcycle that goes 150? Why do you need, fill in the blank? If that's your idea, then apply that idea to every scenario. Let's do a recall on cars, including your 5 beautiful cars, and then let's remanufacture them. I told them, if you're going to make speed limits 30, cars that can't go past 30, nobody's going to die. Very few, by the way, even if you're drunk. And then let's combine that with alcohol. Alcohol and cars are leading killers of people over guns, I assure you. And that includes, when we use gun data, that includes, unfortunately, the 60% that are suicide. It's a ruse. It's a false argument. It's a straw man argument. And you have to ask yourself, why are they making the gun grab versus the alcohol grab versus the fast vehicle grab? And then I think the answer is control.
Yeah, once someone pushes a lie over and over again, it's reasonable to sit back and say, why would they do that? They would do that because there's an angle, there's an objective. And we know who we're dealing with now. We absolutely know. If Trump provided a service to the country, it's that he pulled the wool away from the eyes. We now know exactly who we're dealing with politically. We are not dealing with good faith actors here. We're dealing with people who are absolutely cynical and hateful. They detest the country that was founded, and they're doing everything in their power to erode all of our institutions, all of our norms, all of our truly democratic and constitutional republic norms. They're doing everything they can to make the Constitution irrelevant. And they will not stop. And look, I just getting back to Trump again real quick. I know there's a lot of people who are saying this isn't going to go anywhere, and he's not going to spend a day in prison. Okay, that's certainly my hope. But he's going to be booked. He's going to be fingerprinted.
Sure,
conceivably.
Yeah.
He might even be what's the term? Frog marched
Perp walked.
Before the cameras. He may even be forced to sit
the
there
hell did you
for a
get Frog
mugshot.
March? Where'd you get the frog?
I read it.
Frog March.
He made it up.
I like it. It's
Where in the world did I see that?
All right, you make it up. You take credit for it.
No, I actually didn't. I saw it in an article by Nolte. I think he used that. Nolte's a good writer for Breitbart. I thought he used that term, and he used it well. And so I don't think it's going to stop there. And you're going to have a criminal trial, and you're going to see all this pomp and circumstance around it. You're going to see.
You might not have a trial. I hope we don't.
Yeah,
I mean, you got issues with that. I mean, the legal theory is insane.
So let's enter into evidence
Exactly,
right now.
yes.
I'm on the record as saying I desperately hope this won't happen. I'm just saying I know that we're dealing with communists.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They will
You're right.
not stop.
Got it.
They want a criminal trial. We know where Alvin Bragg's coming from. We know that he's corrupt to the bone. He made it very, very clear that his objective was to get Trump. Boy, that's the kind of attitude you want in every DA, right? My goodness. So we know he's going to pursue that. You know he's going to find a Manhattan jury, and he's going to saturate it with Trump haters. Look, this isn't. I'm not being a genius, and I'm not being a conspiratorialist. I'm being a realist. This has happened over and over and over again. And I know, Nico, we're going to get to the Georgia trial once at some point, but you're going to see the same crap play out there. And so I am not optimistic that there are enough institutions, there are enough decent judges, there are enough decent juries in the country at this point. There are enough levers of power to counteract this. And my faith in our representative government on the GOP side is minimal. We do have some really great individuals right now. I applaud guys like Josh Hawley. I applaud guys like Marco Rubio. I'm grateful for Ted Cruz. I'm thankful that he's been stalwart. He was able to get over the petty indignities, really, of the 2016 election season, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful from Jim Jordan, and I think he's doing great work. We got some great guys in the House of Representatives. I just don't know that we have enough unity in the GOP, and I'm very concerned that when you look at the institutionalization of communistic power across the country, I don't know where that firewall is going to be. Enter Trump. Trump is the only one with the financial means and with the disposition, I would call it.
Yeah, that's a good word.
The guy, his disposition is right, wrong, or indifferent. I mean, it's absolutely fearless, and he will call a spade a spade. And so, hence, all of this concerted hatred to stop this man. And I guess I would ask this question, I shut up. Let's assume Trump's not in a game. Let's assume Trump doesn't run. Let's assume they actually stop him. Who will be an alternative to Trump? Who? Who does anyone think has the financial means and the disposition and the sort of internal firepower to go after the all-out assault on the American system?
Yeah, it's a rhetorical question. I don't know. I haven't seen it either. Whether you like Trump or not, he irritates the crap out of me sometimes. Look, I mean, this is a ER situation, MASH unit. I don't care if I like the doctor or not. I mean, we got to save lives. I mean, it's that type of. I think there's a lot of people that think that way too.
Well said.
You know, you think of that. So George brought up a lot of stuff. So we have the legal theory that District Attorney Braggs is let's
talk about that,
he's going to do that. So we have the legal theory. We have the fact that the Federal Elections Commission did not, because this is all important, by the way, did not prosecute the campaign finance violation allegedly.
And the Department of Justice.
The Department of Justice said no to it also, even under that guy Garland. And then Cy Vance, the previous DA before Braggs,
that's right,
said no. And Braggs even said no. Braggs said, I'm not going to go forward on this. It's not there. And then two lead prosecutors that had that Trump deranged syndrome, left and then wrote a book, which is another topic when you talk about ethics. I mean, there's an open investigation. They write a book about it. I mean, I don't know if anybody filed state bar violations on their law license. I have no idea. I'm just saying all that's relevant stuff. So you have all that. So you have Braggs that declined to prosecute this before, Alvin Braggs. And now he is. I want to know why. I mean, maybe it'll come out. Maybe he's going to hide behind. It's an active investigation. It's an active prosecution. That's
Can I get some clarification from you?
Yeah.
So the Federal Election Commission and the Department of Justice both decided that they were not going to prosecute. It wasn't prosecutable federally.
Well, they didn't feel. I don't know what they didn't. I don't know if they said it wasn't prosecutable. They either believed it wasn't prosecutable, or they didn't have enough evidence. Although they thought it was a crime, but they didn't have evidence. That could be real too. I'm not saying they did say that. I'm just
Fair
I wanna
enough.
be accurate.
The outcome is the same, though. That
Outcome
they,
is the same,
They
you're
didn't
right.
pursue it, and that's
Correct.
really on the federal side.
Correct.
Bragg really doesn't have any jurisdiction at the federal level. So,
It does not.
and that's important to recognize.
Unless
that
there's a corresponding state law that mimics the federal law, but he cannot prosecute a federal crime. Correct.
right, but he'd have to prosecute it under state statute, not
Correct.
not federally. Okay.
100%.
And it's just so people understand it. Please, if I'm wrong, I'm trying to clarify this. If you're running for a federal office, from the Congress to the president, you're subject to federal election law, not to state law.
State law.
And so Bragg, what I think is interesting is that under state law, and I think it's Article 175, New York Penal Code. This is a misdemeanor, at least what's at issue here.
The false business record entry, allegedly, if that even happened.
Let's summarize what
Okay,
what
so
he did there.
the legal
what the
theory
charge
that
is.
many people believe that this is what they're going to go on is that, number one, there was a false business entry into his records. Now, the problem with that under New York law, from my understanding, and other people have agreed with this, is that you need intent to defraud. So where are they going to get, and we call that mens rea. I've talked about that before, the mental intent. Who is he defrauding? On this false entry, it's a business record, but that's a misdemeanor to George's point. The statutes run on that years ago. So to extend the statute of limitation and make it a felony, they have to say that false business agreement was done to cover up another crime. And that crime, to George's point earlier, was a Federal Elections Commission's violation, meaning the campaign finance that he was doing it to influence and Cohen's payoff was a contribution to the campaign, and you didn't log it as a contribution to your campaign.
Stole my thunder. Well said.
Sorry, brother.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
exactly right.
It's such.
Exactly right.
Forget about novel. It's crazy.
It's basically a misdemeanor in search of a felony, and he has to enter this that Trump acted with an intent to defraud.
Correct.
In order to cover up another alleged crime,
Yes.
which would have been the campaign,
which he doesn't have the authority to
finance.
prosecute anyway.
Right.
I mean, it's
Exactly right.
It's, I know Karen's like, well, you guys are nuts.
I'm looking at the clock.
No, forget the clock. It's all right. But I'm just saying, that's the gymnastics, the legal gymnastics that we believe, unless there's something we don't know, but I doubt it.
Well, in the way that you can't convince some people that it's not the guns, it's the people. I keep on thinking you can't convince some people that this incident with Trump and this indictment is not going to affect them. But I want to ask you about that, and we will continue next on Sidebar.
With reputations.
These commercials for LaHood Norton are getting in our way.
better be a good firm.
You can pay me to take them off.
That's true.
Give me some hush money. Give me some hush money and I'll hush my commercial.
You know, you bring up the whole hush money. Let's just have this scenario. So let's just say Trump is not President Trump, and the person, Donald Trump, uses money, his own money, to get rid of Stormy Daniels or whoever it is.
What do you mean get rid of? You mean
okay. Get her hushed.
Quiet. Okay,
hushed.
Okay, yeah. All right.
So if it wasn't part of the campaign, would there be charges against Trump for using money, supposedly, hush money, a hush money payment? And what is that? Is that like a, don't tell anybody? What is it called?
It's a non-disclosure agreement.
Non-disclosure, right.
So hush money payments are not inherently illegal. They're non-disclosure agreements.
Is it unusual? Do people
no, they're
do it
very common. NDAs are used not just for alleged affairs. They're used for a lot of different things. When you negotiate a closing and you paid this, and one company buys out another company, and you have an NDA not to pay this or whatever, and you don't call it a hush contract, but it's a non-disclosure agreement. You have private information that you shared when you're going to maybe take over a company or you're going to merge, and it doesn't happen after all, and there's an NDA and there's consideration paid for it. So there's offer, acceptance, consideration, basic contracts 101. So hush payment, hush money, NDAs are not inherently illegal. So the question has to be asked, would this payment have been made if, even apart from the campaign, let's say that he wasn't, to your question, he wasn't running for office, it wasn't former President Trump or potential President Trump. I mean, yes, of course it would have been. Yeah. I mean, his organization, George and Karen, has his name on it, Trump Organization. And if this happened, or even if it didn't happen, he just wants to shut her up. He's like, hey, look, I'm not going to fight this in the media. Here's this NDA. And by the way, there's controverting evidence allegedly where she said it didn't happen and it wasn't paid for this. That too. All that's going to come out if it even gets past, a motion to quash or whatever happens legally in New York. And there's going to be different types of motions, and the motions practice will be very, it'll be big moving forward. But so it's not illegal in and of itself. They're saying that it's because it was a contribution, it was logged in wrong, and it was affecting the campaign. There's all different types of theories. So the NDA in of itself, it happens all the time in all over this country.
Right. So, I'm just thinking about how this came about. So the charge that Trump actually paid Stormy Daniels $130,000 through his then attorney, Michael Cohen, who, by the way, was found guilty and sentenced to 3 years in prison for things like tax evasion and campaign finance law violations, I think, a number of other charges.
Lying.
Yeah. And then Trump flatly denies that this happened, by the way. But then supposedly the Trump Organization then falsified, as you said, their business records by entering it as legal expenses in order to basically compensate Cohen for this payment that he made of $130,000. And they did it over time, and they entered it as legal expenses. There's the sort of bookkeeping error or the falsification of the business records. But it would be legal expense.
I mean, I argue that it would be. It's a legal matter. It's an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. It's consideration for something else. I mean, who enters into their books hush money payment for an affair?
Right.
And I'm not condoning affairs. I'm a Christian. I believe in fidelity with your spouse.
But
I got to wear my lawyer hat, not my Christian hat.
Like you're saying, in a sense, who cares? A lot of people make bookkeeping errors, or these things happen all day long. But then I like the way Dershowitz said it. He just has a way with words. He says, in order to turn the state statute that we just covered right now, right, on the bookkeeping side, into a felony, you have to borrow a federal statute.
Correct.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
And so he said, so basically, if they're saying that it was an alleged crime of sort of underhanded contribution to the campaign, right, and then it was recorded as a legal expense, then now it gets into sort of federal purview.
Can I give you an example? I'll give you a real example. So in state law, if you're a convicted felon, you've been incarcerated, or you have a conviction, you can have a felon in possession of a firearm. The only exception, after 5 years of being released from incarceration or from your community supervision, after 5 years, state-wise, you can have a gun. You can own a gun legally in your home. That's how much we believe in protecting your home in Texas, right? Legally. On the federal side, it's perpetual. You can never own a firearm, not even your home.
Got it.
So let's say you're 7 years removed from your incarceration, and you have a gun at home, and for whatever reason they find a gun in your home, that would be like a prosecutor, a state DA, borrowing from the federal statute to say you can never have it. I'm just trying to give you some closest way I can think of.
But the problem is there is no such New York state law.
That's right.
And so that's what he's borrowing.
Do they have time to pass one real fast?
Grandfather, it's grandfathered in.
Okay.
Don't put it past these hacks.
Right.
But that's really what's at issue here, and that's why it's considered a spurious legal theory. Look, this is all really interesting. But again, in a normal America, this would go nowhere. But I think the question is this a normal America? It really isn't. This is the problem. We're dealing with individuals who will stop at nothing to get Trump. That's why I'm saying over the next 19 months, you're going to see more and more and more of this prosecutorial abuse. And that's why I opened with talking about child mutilation and castration. If you're talking about boys, it's like people who do that with a smile on their face. And I have no issue with that. And pushing it along is somehow moral. The idea that they will not hunt down a president prosecutorially and abuse that is nonsense. They're not going to stop. These people will stop at nothing to get power.
Now, what happens if some county in Texas or Mississippi or some other conservative state wants to prosecute President Clinton, President Obama, President Biden once he's out of office or in office or whatever? Now, is that okay now too? Or are we going to have this? I mean, all these miserable hacks on The View that are they're just disgusting people. I would say it to their face. I wish they'd have me on the show just so I could respectfully say they're disgusting.
That would be the first time I would watch it.
If you listen, because I get sent these people send this clip about how they handled the Nashville shooting, how they handle this stuff. There's no logical, there's no critical thinking, there's no disagreeing with their side, there's no reasoning with them. They have no logic, they have no facts to back up. It's all emotion, and what they're spewing is just they're all happy and Oberman and all these fools. They have no idea what Pandora's box has been opened up. This is horrible. First of all, look, no one's above the law, no one's below the law. If there was an obvious, this is something that you better have just blatant offenses before you go after a former political president as high, for opponent as like a president or anything like that. You just really better do that. I mean, obviously people have prosecuted senators before, congressmen, all this other stuff. And I'm not saying I couldn't see some set of circumstances where a former president would be prosecuted. I'm not saying it should be some, carte blanche, you can't prosecute for any reason, but it better be super clear, because you're opening up Pandora's box. And then remember, be careful the world you help create, Karen, because someday you may have to live in it.
But this flimsy indictment against him, the people that hate him are like, yes, he got indicted. Yes, but in reality, is that all they wanted? Is that just what the courts wanted to say, that the president was indicted? Where do we go from here?
It's a religion. That's mindset is a religion. And that's when we're talking about the trans issue, this cultist movement. We talk about gun control. So we have Dems. I'm going to give you an example of this ideology. We have Democrats, and it's mainly it's a majority. It's all Democrats. They want gun control. Yet they're not looking at Braggs, and he's not enforcing his own gun laws. I mean, Alvin Braggs, DA Braggs, reduced 52% of felonies to misdemeanors in New York. New York's a mess. Looks like Gotham. Chicago, a mess. So you want more gun laws, and you're not enforcing the ones that we have already on the books? Talk about hypocrisy. I mean, hypocrisy is a cornerstone of the leftist ideology and cult movement. That's why I say leftism. I want to hold off, and I still want to respect the old school liberal, classical liberal that is a libertarian today probably. But what I'm saying is this is a leftist religion, progressive movement that is actually truly communist in nature. It's not liberalism, classical liberalism. I mean, so you have, how does Alvin Bragg and all these Democrats that are pushing gun control look at Seattle, look at Portland, look at all these places where these gun laws are not being enforced? We have gun laws on the books, convicted felons in possession of guns and firearms. Well, prosecute them. Don't let them out 80 times over so they can commit rapes and murders and run over people with vehicles and all this other stuff. It's completely hypocrisy. Do as I say, not as I do, because their result is not the betterment of the community. To George's point earlier, their result and their goal is control. Period, end of story. So there is no logic. That's why they don't want to debate you. They want to yell at you, call you names, or cancel you. They don't want to debate you because they don't have evidence on their side or objective reasoning.
Yeah, consider a political philosophy that denies that men are men and women are women. And then I ask logically, what follows from there? What isn't possible from there? What will they not deny? Seriously, follow that. As Nico says, play it out philosophically, because what you fundamentally believe is ultimately what you fundamentally act on. And so we've never been at this point in American society. We've always, as a society, and American educational system has always esteemed a commitment to objective truth. This is a complete rejection of that. Whatever the state says, never mind how nuts it is, never mind how cruel it is, never mind how unconstitutional it is or how illegal it is, whatever the state says becomes the norm. And then if you deviate from that, you're in serious trouble. And if you don't think, all of this stuff, it never stops like a hydra. This is why the social credit system matters. How are you aligning your thinking and your conduct with what the state is saying is acceptable? This is ultimately where it's going. And this is why the Trump indictment, and I know, Nico, I mean, indictment, technically, what do they say? You can indict a ham sandwich.
Sure.
Technically, that's not true. It's got to be a person. It can't just be a sandwich. But the adage makes sense. And how did an indictment come forth here, Nico? I mean, Bragg presented probable cause to a grand jury, but it's only on one-sided evidence, whatever the prosecutor.
There's no cross-examination.
There's no cross-examination. So, okay, so they got an indictment, fair enough. But this is significant because if they in fact get Trump, Dershowitz doesn't think that Trump's going to get prison. I'm not sure, but he doesn't think he's going to get prison. But if he does, just the idea that they've crossed this Rubicon here, what does it mean for you, Karen?
I'm next.
What does it mean for me?
Right.
Or Nico? I mean, what does that mean for the average American citizen? That's the kind of stuff we got to be thinking about.
Well, look, I mean, the thing that as we transition into I'm not saying it that way, as we go into the after show, sorry, no pun intended, but if we go into the after show, all of our institutions have been politicized. We've talked about academia, we've talked about science, we've talked about the media, we've talked about medicine, we even talked about how the World Health Organization, now all of a sudden it says that children probably shouldn't take the vaccine and all that other stuff. Oh, okay, now they've changed their mind, so I guess medicine and science is evolving too. But now the justice system, and I've always been advocating, Karen, you know that how does that play out in our justice system? Is that a good idea for our justice system, where Lady Justice is supposed to wear a blindfold? So please join us on the after show on what is it?
SidebarTV.com.
Sidebar TV. Have a blessed week. Thank you for joining us.
The preceding show was paid.
George, during the show, you brought up Dershowitz, and he is not like some big Trump guy. He didn't vote for him, but you said that he has said some things of significance that you'd like to share.
No, but I mean, he's a classical liberal. He would consider himself a libertarian, probably, and he's a fighter for the Constitution. So I applaud him. I have a lot of respect for him. And I think he's written a book, or it's either been released, or I need to get it because I like the way he writes, and I like the stuff he puts out. But it's called Get Trump. Yeah. So it gives you a sense of where he's coming from, and he's not advocating it. I'll tell you that right now. But here's what he said. By the way, he's blown off this idea that this is somehow going to have a material impact on Trump's candidacy in 2024. Here's a quote from him. I want Nico to weigh in legally and just to get your thoughts. He's not going to get prison. But nonetheless, and he theorizes, he can run as a convicted defendant. He can run from prison. They're just rummaging through the law books and doing everything they can to get him. But I don't think they've succeeded. I can't imagine that an appellate court would ever hold this, but I don't think Bragg cares about this. He wants the publicity of a perp walk and an arrest. And so then he continues, it's not a righteous prosecution. It's just not a just prosecution. And I think every libertarian, whether you're conservative or liberal, should be opposed to it. There seem to be two systems of justice in America, he says. One for the rest of us and the other for Trump. And that's the thesis of his book, Get Trump, by the way. There's a special system of targeted injustice against Trump, and this is coming from a liberal Democrat who voted against him twice. That kind of commitment to the truth, regardless of the political party that you vote for, that's American. That's what we're fighting for. We're not fighting for an America where the GOP is a uniparty. We're sure as hell not doing that for Democrats. That's what they want. They want a uniparty. We're fighting for an America, like Nico says, where critical ideas can be exchanged without the fear of reprisal from the government, by way of incarceration, or even worse than that. This is what happens in communist countries. And we are moving in that direction. We're implementing communist ideals right now. This isn't just theoretical. So
why don't people believe that, though?
Say what?
Why don't they believe that we're going in that direction?
Because Americans have had it really, really, really good. And
it's like denial.
It is denial. And so when he uses words like can't imagine, the average American would agree with him. Americans have been largely insulated. And because there's been an alignment between what the people hold dear and what their government holds dear, but that's changing now.
You couldn't imagine 10 years ago that we'd be calling women men and men women. You couldn't imagine a president being indicted. You couldn't imagine a lot of things. So I respectfully, look, Dershowitz said a lot right there. Number one, I don't know why he calls himself a Democrat anymore. He couldn't run in a primary and win. If you can't run in the primary that espouses your ideology, and whether you might be a crappy candidate, I get it, or whatever, you don't have the funds, personality, whatever it is. I'm just saying ideologically, if you can't win in your primary and win, then you're not that party affiliation anymore. He couldn't win. Now, I don't know where he's at. He keeps saying this stuff, but I don't know where he's at on abortion, on marriage, on all the. I mean, I'm assuming he leans left, I guess. I mean, if he's more libertarian, but he just says I'm a liberal Democrat and I didn't vote for him. I'm going to vote for Joe Biden again. Why? I mean, I'm just curious why he wants to. Joe Biden, his ideology is the one that's assaulting the Constitution. Yeah. And if the Constitution is his quote unquote religion, and I don't know if he's a practicing Jew or what his faith is.
Yes, he is.
He's okay. Well, I don't know. So he believes in he believes in God. He believes in the God that Christians believe in. So I'm just saying I don't know. I mean, that's a different discussion I'd like to have over coffee with him sometime. But we have to see the indictment. I mean, I'm really curious to see the indictment. There's 34 counts. Now, the only thing that I can contemplate, and a lot of people, each payment, 30 something.
You've added to that already?
I mean, there's
wouldn't surprise me.
First of all, how do you know that there's 30 something counts?
And at least one felony, right? Is that accurate?
I think they're all felonies. No, they're all felonies. What do you mean one felony? They're all felonies.
I heard there were just at least one felony. I didn't realize they were all felonies. Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Because remember, if there are any misdemeanors, would be statute of limitations. They're done. There's no way he can't prosecute on a misdemeanor. So they're all felonies. So you have all these counts, over 30 or more, 30 count indictment. First of all, the fact that the indictment was that the jury came back with a true bill, and everybody knew about it before Trump's team. That's a crime in New York.
Yeah.
That's a felony in New York. Is Alvin Bragg looking at and trying to find out who leaked that information? So this selective 52% of felonies are reduced down to misdemeanors. He's not prosecuting people that are punching women and throwing them in front of trains and murdering and this, but he's going to go after this guy. Bill Clinton, he made payments to what's her face, Paula, what's her name? What was her name?
Jones. Paula Jones.
And allegedly raped somebody, allegedly in the White House, allegedly did all these things. Nobody's being prosecuted for these things, but Trump is. And Alvin Bragg wasn't even going to prosecute this. His predecessor didn't prosecute this. Alvin Bragg said this is not enough. I'm just so curious what changed. And if it's Michael Cohen, that guy, no credible prosecutor would put someone like Michael Cohen on the stand. It's suicide to your prosecution. Not to mention you have Robert Costello, his former lawyer, after Cohen lied about signing the waiver of attorney-client privilege.
Called him a serial liar.
Called him a serial liar. And Cohen and Costello used to be a prosecutor. He was a defense attorney, real matter of fact, very consistent, brings evidence. He's not emotional. Cohen's made statements like, "Oh, you can't rape your wife. You do this. I'm not going to prison no matter what. I'm going to do anything to get out of this." This guy is absolute, not only a narcissist. This guy's a sick, deranged person that will do anything literally to accomplish a goal. Literally anything. I wouldn't put anything past him. A prosecutor would run from someone like that, even if you thought that the suspect is guilty. But that's your level of witness, and that's all you have. You have that and a porn star who has made controverting statements.
Exactly,
in the past.
to say it didn't happen.
You really got to look at the indictment to see what the actual charges are and the manner and means of how he allegedly committed these offenses.
What I left out is I think the concerning part of the statement. He goes on to say, I think
back on Dershowitz.
Well, because I want to tie in what you said. He claims that this is very dangerous because you're talking about the impact on the justice system.
Yes,
because this is very, very dangerous. We have DAs that can indict their own political enemies, and he asks an interesting question. He goes, "How does this not affect the rule of law for all Americans?"
100%.
Today it's Trump. Tomorrow it could be a Democrat. The day after tomorrow it could be me, you, it could be our Uncle Charlie, he says. I think these are the terms in which we need to be thinking right now.
Yeah,
that's right. These are the terms in which we need to be thinking. This is way beyond Trump. We got to be thinking about.
It was leading up to this, George. So you have Antifa that destroys billions of dollars. People are killed and murdered. Okay. Then you have January 6th, which we know there were violations on January 6th.
Of course.
So the problem is two things can be true at the same time. People could have been there protesting legally, and people could have been there being a bunch of assholes. So you can have assholes and legal people protesting at the same time. So you have that, but then everybody's lumped in at the same time. And then you have mostly peaceful protests as there's fire and people dying and blowing up in the background. You have Chaz, where they're taking over Seattle and making their own system, and people got killed there, and they have borders, by the way, ironically. You have this selective prosecution, but then you have this investigation on parents because they want to go to school board meetings, and they're labeled domestic terrorists. And then you have people that are praying and protesting outside of abortion clinics, and they're assaulted, but then they get prosecuted. Thank God a jury acquitted that man up north. So this is no surprise to me. This has been leading up to this.
That's right.
Look at what we've seen. So this is just the culmination. I think George and Dershowitz should be saying. George is saying, Dershowitz should be saying is now there's no turning back. Now what's off the table? Nothing is off limits. Nothing. But now here's the problem, Karen. Don't forget your thought. Jump in. Is now what happens when the Republican or the conservative does it to the Democrat?
Will that even happen? I don't even have any belief. I get it, what you're saying, but I don't have any belief anymore that the Republicans will do anything as retaliation.
And they don't need any of that. They're already burning down the country. That's the point. I think that's why it was so ominous in 2020 when we were sitting. I was sitting there stunned watching what was happening. I felt like, is this really America? We have this alignment of the Democrat political establishment. They literally just sat on their ass, totally silent. As rioters and murderers and cop killers and Antifa and Black Lives Matter, are just pillaging. What was the final tally? It was you had 35 deaths, you have 1,500 wounded, and billions in damages. 4 months of this nonsense and absolute silence.
And we're scratching the surface. We've already talked about what they're doing with kids, but I mean, we've talked in here about borders as well and what they're doing. These are people who have no qualms about replacing an American population with illegal aliens who are going to be much more compliant to their whims. They have no qualms about that. Flooding the country. Right now, we have a fentanyl epidemic. You were talking about
100%.
alcohol. I mean, we have an opioid crisis. Interestingly enough and fascinatingly, prescribed opioids that issue is dropping through the basement. It's being replaced by fentanyl. Last year, over 70,000 deaths from fentanyl.
That was 100. Wasn't it 100?
And most of it.
It was a lot.
I'm just using the CDC's
Okay,
conservative
right,
numbers,
right.
but it probably is worse.
Yeah,
No,
people
you're
use the
probably
word
right.
100, yeah.
But think about that for a moment. I mean, and they're just sitting idly by. They're totally okay with it. Most of it's China manufactured, and most of it is administered in other illicitly obtained drugs. That I don't know if you guys know how that works. They're basically lacing these drugs with fentanyl because it's so much more potent. It gives them a kick, right?
Most kids don't even know they're taking fentanyl.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. You think you're taking some other drug and you're not. I mean, it only takes about 2 milligrams to wipe out a human being. There's enough fentanyl in this country right now to kill every single American twice. And
Let that sink in.
This is pouring across the border.
But you worry about guns.
Right. You're replacing an American population right now for political power. These people, I'm telling you, they have no limits to what they're willing to do. This is why the 2024 election is absolutely consequential. It's not just the most important election. I think it is the election after which I don't see any more elections. They already have a one seat, but what's the Senate makeup right now? They already have a majority in the Senate. Remember, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, which is for them to pass the For the People Act, where they federalize elections, right? What happens when that happens? We have to really step back and see that this is a coordinated effect. It's not a conspiracy. It's a coordinated effect to undo America. And they're having so much success. And we better get off our effing ass and push back. We have elected representatives and we need to demand action and unity from our federal representatives. I like what Rick Grinnell said, that every single political opponent of Trump right now who is aspiring candidate for the presidency ought to drop out and support Trump.
I agree. I mean, look, how do you not? Look,
That's the moment we're at in America. I can't believe he's saying that.
He's
right.
We really are. I mean, look, people have everyone has to speak up, and you've got to be prepared to have debates. You've got to be prepared to be called names. You've got to be prepared to potentially be canceled. You've got to be prepared to go through some perseverance. And James 1:2-4 says, count it pure joy. That's the hard part, but there's a meaning to that. When you go through trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so you'll be mature and lack nothing.
Yes.
So it will mature us, but also we have to do it. I said this. I was talking to a friend of mine during politics and campaigning, and you say, I'm really worried about the world we're leaving back to our kids. I've never meant that more. I really am worried. I mean, it burdens me. I mean, I stay up at night, and David Chulo, you got to go to bed. No, my mind's racing. Is there a talk? Is there a podcast? Is there one ear? Is there one person? Because maybe, screw me, maybe that person that hears or changes their mind, maybe they're the person. Maybe they're the one that's going to go do something. We need good candidates to run. We need people to vet them out. We need if there's a conservative Republican Party, we need to appeal to people. There's a lot of people, and get these labels off. I mean, you can have tats, you can have purple hair, nose rings, whatever. If you want to be conservative, you're trying to preserve the ideology, the ideas of this pursuit. They have these inalienable rights endowed on us by a creator. So if you believe in the Constitution, you believe that a creator, not government, endowed, bestowed rights on you. This right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. They all mean something. We're going to say that over and over again. You're going to get tired of hearing it from us because it means something. And we've got to go back to learning that, and kids learning that. We've got to go back to preserving that. That's what we have to preserve, Karen.
Please let me read a couple of the comments. Okay. And I'm going to read 3, and then we can comment on whichever one you want. Yeah. Amy Hollier says, the world we live in scares me. And a couple of people have liked that statement. Sid says, you can't speak to Dems, libs, progressive, because when they feel like they're losing, they just start to scream. Saw it with the senators earlier this week. Dems just started screaming for no reason. And as you're talking about rioted, looted, pillage, it just doesn't matter. And then finally, Ruth says, how do we combat the method in use today where polite GOP leaders allow irrational Dems to rule because they were allowed to get away with it?
You got to start at home. You got to vote. So we have a 14-year-old daughter and 12-year-old, our son, he's on the spectrum, and then a 10-year-old daughter and then a 7-year-old son. And I'm training them up, especially our 14-year-old. There's not a conversation off limits. We talk about everything, every political. There's not anything that's off limits for us. And then, of course, my answers are always biblical answers. But I told my daughter, I said, I don't want you to just say you're a Christian. I want you to believe it. I want you to own it. I want you to say, this is my identity. This is who I am. I can't change the way I think. I want you to understand that our faith is real, that it's authoritative, that God's word is real, and that you can trust it, that God is real. We're going to stand before him someday, that Jesus Christ is who he says he is. By the way, Holy Week is going to be this week, and we're going to celebrate Resurrection Day next week, which is the most significant day in the Christian, belief and faith. And there's strong evidence for it. And George and I have done studies and Bible studies and presentations on the credibility of the resurrection. But I wanted to believe that. And so we're contemplating, I'm going to pull in old Theo George, whether he likes it or not, where we're going to invite, my daughter starts high school next year. Our daughter starts high school. And I said, I want to know your friends. And we know their friends, but I want them to come over, maybe do it once a month. My friend Joel, when his kids were in high school, I went to go speak to them. This is years ago now. They're empty nesters. And there was 30, 40 kids there, and they were eating and having a great time, and he's influencing them and I gave shared my testimony, and of course he wanted it to be biblically minded because they're Christians. And I want parents to say, bring your kids can come over. We're going to talk. Mm-hmm. We're going to, what questions do you have? This is our mindset. Look, you're going to hear an F-bomb. I don't give a shit. You better leave your sensitivities at the door. I got now this is I wouldn't do this from the pulpit, but yeah. I got Christians out there that said, "Oh, Nico said the word fuck." Yeah, I said the word fuck. It's hyperbole. You understand? But you're not worried about them teaching your kid how to fuck at 5 years old in school, and you're going to worry about the F word? Oh, should I say freak? Oh, you're out of your freaking mind? Get the fuck out of here. We've got to understand. We've got to understand. No, we got to understand.
Just to put it in context for you.
No, we got to understand the battle.
Absolutely.
We've got to understand the battle.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of my grandkids.
Exactly.
I'm thinking of my children, and I'm thinking about what they're dealing with here. What are we doing? Right. What are we doing here? And we're not doing anything. And so the weak and the malicious give you the same result. The malicious person is trying to hurt you. The weak person is not trying to hurt you, but they're so weak, they'll let the malicious person hurt you. Mm-hmm. What's the result? You still get hurt. Enough of that. And I'm not saying do anything illegal. You've got to work within the confines of our structure, but you've got to be bold. Grow a pair of church bells and get out there and fight. You've got to fight for the minds. And so that's what we're going to do. I'm going to invite kids over. I'm going to speak with them. We're going to talk real and raw, R-rated Christianity. And I'm going to, if they want to hear about it, I'm going to teach them about a redemptive relationship with a first century Jew named Jesus. And he's real. I love the rawness of Christ. Yeah. When you dig into the scriptures, when you understand history, when you look at non-biblical sources of people that talk about Jesus, that weren't Christians, by the way, from Josephus to everything, Tacitus, Suetonius, Plenty the Younger, all these people, Phlegon, that are mentioning Christianity and Jesus, and they're not Christians. And kids need to know, people need to know you can rely on that. And then you get down deep into the ideology of Christianity. And we're seeing it, and we understand what it is. And when you see it play out in the country and a community, and why our founding fathers said this set of ideas, we can debate whether how many were committed Christians. They were definitely theists. Some think they were deists. Whatever, we can have that debate. The vast majority were Christians. They believed in the Christian ideology. And just like a guy named Andrew Schultz, I sent this to you, Jeff and George, a guy comedian, always talked about being atheist. He goes, I wouldn't mind my kids learning about Christianity. This guy's a real popular comedian, funny as hell. And he goes, I went to a Christian service. Thank you guys. Service. And I was crying within 3 minutes. What are you crying at? I want to know. I would love to be on that podcast. Andrew, why were you crying? What in your very successful Hollywood comedian world life, and I'm not being condescending, I really want to know. I see it every day. I really want to, what are you missing? Why were you crying? What were you crying about? I'm fascinated by that. And what about the Christian service experience brought that emotion out in you? That's what we're seeing.
That there's hope and faith
Karen,
and everything else.
My brother was there. George was there. When I was 2 weeks ago, I spoke at CBC, Community Bible Church, and God bless Pastor Ed and his team, Pastor Hutch, Marquise, and they had me there, 1,300 men plus on a Monday night, to hear some broken ass motherfucker talk about his walk with Christ, to talk about why I'm a Christian and I'm a Christ follower. And they were there on a Monday night. What about Jordan Peterson, even though he's not a Christian, but he espouses biblical principles? Not that I know of. He hasn't given me evidence that he's a Christian. I think he's close. But what about he espouses biblical principles? Why does that draw people in? We've got to be able to properly handle the word of truth. 2 Timothy 2:15, 1 Peter 3:15. Always be able to give an answer. Always be prepared. Yeah. Sorry for the sermon, but I'm just saying the time for passivity in the sense of, I better keep my mouth shut, is over. Now pray about it. I say all the time in the men's Bible studies, the 11th commandment is don't be a dickhead. Okay.
I love that one.
Don't be a dickhead.
I really do.
Be wise about it. Try properly handle the word of truth. Be able to answer, why are you a Christian and what does it mean? Because if you can answer those questions, then the Andrew Schultz that's crying within 3 minutes, his own words, of being in a Christian service because he's hearing the praise and worship and there's something happening and stirring in his heart and he's looking for something. What are you looking for, Andrew Schultz? What are you looking for, Jordan Peterson, that cries when he talks about Christ? What are you looking for? We'll fill in the blank. We see this, and I've seen it over and over again, and we got to be able to give answers, and we got to start with our young people. Let's take the gloves off ideologically. Let's be dangerous with your thoughts and be able to protect yourself, of course. But you got to be able to engage in this arena of thought and this arena of ideas, and we're not doing that. And this is a result. We have hell on earth.
I like what Andrew Schultz said before that, where they were dogging him because this science teacher didn't believe in evolution, but the state required her to teach it.
Right, I heard that.
And they said, well, then why should I listen to you if
you don't believe it? You don't believe it.
And then he's like, we shouldn't be having these Christians teaching these, values to these kids. And Andrew Schultz says, I'm cool with my kids.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, and then that's how we got into this discussion.
Yeah.
That's exactly how the discussion started, Jeff. You're right.
Well, how the fuck am I supposed to add to that? How am I going to add to that?
Don't talk like that. Don't like that. Sorry, guys. Look, I'm passionate.
Look, these really are grave times.
Bro.
They're absolutely grave times. And there's a little correction to the question. I understand. You can't talk to Democrats. Actually, it's the Democrat base that's completely unhinged. They're the communistic base. Right. Everything that I described that they're doing, from pretending that women are men and men are women, to pushing for policies that hurt kids. And these are the people who are storming Kentucky. These are people who are storming Tennessee. These are people who are storming Texas. Those are the people that are completely unhinged. It's not just the trans cult. It's not just that. Although I've always called the LGBTQ cult a cult and a militaristic cult and a violent cult. Never mind the sexual perversion. We'll save that for another day. I'm just talking about what they're doing. They're being terroristic in their actions. It's the Democrat base. It's them. It's all of these groups, these activists, and people who support them. A lot of rich, I hate to say it, white people who sit in their ivory towers and think they're doing a country a favor by, in the name of compassion, by supporting these activist groups. It's insane. But there's a lot of Democrats like Dershowitz. There are.
Yeah, there are.
And they're worth our time.
They're quiet though. Yeah.
They're worth our time. And I have found that they're not what I would call necessarily a low information person. They're steeped in an ideology traditionally. Their granddaddy, their great granddaddy voted Democrat, and it's just the way things have been done in their family. And I would suspect that many of your neighbors might be that way.
Yeah.
Take the time to understand what issues matter to them and how they understand those issues, and then challenge their assumptions. But that means we actually have to take the time to do this thing, hold on to something, called study. Get off our ass and study something. What did Jesus say to the church? Matthew 22:29, one of Jeff's favorite scriptures. He quotes it often, and I think it's a good scripture. Your problem is that you don't know the scriptures. And you don't know, and he doesn't stop there, and you don't know the power of God. There's a relationship between knowing what the scripture actually says and truly experiencing the power of God. There is no the power of God in a Christian life without grounding your thoughts and your actions on the scripture. And so what we have right now is a ballless church.
Yes.
We have no courage because we don't know what we believe. That's Matthew 22:29 in practice.
22:29, right?
22:29 in practice. Jesus says you don't know the scriptures, therefore you don't know the power of God. That's the church today.
Yep.
We don't know the scripture.
But how crazy that's the church.
That's exactly right. So I'm getting back to Nico's really sort of thesis here, which is the statement, which is it's got to start at home.
Yes.
And that's where we need to spend our time. We've just spent the hour talking about policy and what the government's doing because it's insane, because it's led by a communist cabal. But the solution starts here. It's not just finger pointing and venting and pointing out the problem, there's a time and place for that. But ultimately, it's got to start at home. And I love the model that you gave of opening up your home.
We got to do
Are you
it.
willing to have 20 kids, 25 kids? Are you guys willing to do that? However
50.
many your home
Bring
will
'em in.
accommodate.
That's exactly what I did
Are
with
you
my
willing to
kids.
do that?
Everybody's coming to my house. You're not going.
But I'm talking about having
Yes.
fun. But I want them to be able to say, Mr. and Mrs. LaHood, I got a
Absolutely.
problem.
Let me go one step further. I want to
go,
forget
go.
this thought.
Okay.
Because I want to combine what the concerns people are raising to what Nico said. I love what you said, and I want people to hear carefully. I also want to volunteer. I hope I'm not out of line here.
Volunteer.
I'll volunteer us. If you might feel, well, I don't know what to say to them. That's really not my thing. We'll come. How about you guys set up, reach out to the show, set up an activity. You fill your house with 30 or 40 or 50 kids. We'll be there.
I've done it many times.
You let us know, and we'll be there.
How blessed are those kids?
I mean, we'll
be?
obviously need to vet it and get some information on what it is that you're trying to do and that kind of thing. But if you get a bunch of teenagers there. You get a bunch of college-age kids.
I think Salo, Dom, when we first, I knew Salo before, but Salo recorded when I was a DA. I went down to Alamo Heights, and and we've shown it on the R-rated show before. He has it recorded somewhere. The older one. I'm in my suspenders.
So good,
I was on the road. I was running around. This lady reached out to me and said, "You know what? We have a Christian organization here at Alamo Heights, and we do a luncheon. Just come in and talk with them." And there was like 60 kids there. It was at Alamo Heights in a little room on the backside. I was going somewhere else, and I said, "Of course I'll show up." I showed up. I was still in office at the time, and they were there eating. And I just said, "Look, I'm gonna talk raw. I mean, I don't know how you guys do it, but if this is, they're doing it. They're hearing it. I got permission. Ephesians 4:29. I considered my audience. I asked permission." And there was moms there, and I said, "Look, I'm not going to try or not try, but I don't know. When I get into it, I'm going to tell you." And I gave them a talk, and it was so affirming. You could see they were hungry. A good majority of them came up after. "Thank you so much. Thank you." Shared my testimony. Tell them why you can trust being a Christian. Had a raw talk with them, real and raw. And I don't know where it went because I didn't water it. I didn't nurture it. We got a mentorship. Discipleship is important in the church. If you're at a church that's not speaking truth boldly, is not directing you back to the Christian, is not telling you, "Hey, I'm the pastor, I'm just the shepherd. This is the true shepherd. It's all about Christ," then you're in the wrong church. That's why we're huge fans of our church, Hillside Fellowship, and Pastor Dave Tucker. I'm a huge fan of CBC and Pastor Ed Newton. They're both dear friends of mine. You can't go wrong going to any of those churches. I'm not saying there's no other churches to do it right. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just telling you, I've worked with both those churches, and I attend a Hillside Fellowship, and then I've worked very closely with Pastor Ed, Pastor Hutch, Pastor Marquise, and all of them over there, and they have a great team over there. And being bold, and because it's got to leave the four walls. And I think it's appropriate for us to talk about it. This is Holy Week.
Yep.
What about the Christian ideology? Still the vast majority of people in this country, the biggest religion, quote unquote, or faith is Christianity, even though the stats in this country suck. People aren't going to church. People aren't identifying as Christians. There's a word, identifying. Even the ones that do, less than 10% of them believe in a biblical worldview. What the hell are we doing? What about, I believe everything in those 66 books. I know when it's literal, when it's metaphorical, allegorical, poetry, whatever. George has been, we go through this. George has gone deep dive in his studies, and I always brag about him, and whether he likes it or not, I'm doing it. But deep, we have to get deep in there, and there's so many resources. It's not like in the old days. I have George, and we do our studies privately and then publicly, and so iron sharpens iron here. But there's so many sources out there. We've got to get deeper. You cannot just read the Bible. You've got to study it. And when I talk to atheists or agnostics and I unpack a misconception they have, they go, "No shit." I go, "Yes, that's what it. This is wow. Hold on, let me think." And that's where this hunger is. Again, I go back to this Andrew Schultz. What is he crying about within 3 minutes of going to a good Christian service? And we're all crying for something inside, and the world has no answers for us.
That's absolutely right. There's a giant vacuum at the very center of us. It can only be filled by Christ and what Christ taught. And look, if you guys don't know what to say, you're talking to your kids, because Nico said it starts at home, and he gave you some very powerful examples of practical things you can do. But between now and an event like that, there's things that you can do. I always come back, to the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. If you can read, open that up, and there's just so much in that entry statement. You can have an amazing conversation about that. I guarantee.
Say it, George. Just do it.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Amen.
that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, you could spend 3 hours on that.
Oh,
I know, it's
And you would
amazing.
come out in tears if you look at the parallels between that and the biblical propositions,
Yes.
right, of the Old and the New Testament.
yes.
We don't teach that anymore. There's no way you could read and teach the Declaration of Independence in an American classroom and graduate kids that hate their country.
Nope.
Couldn't happen.
Nope.
But you flip that on its head, and yeah, you graduate revolutionaries. And that's what we have right now. Okay? The hacks that are storming capitals aren't people who are invested in their own Declaration of Independence. Ironically, able to do that crap. I would say illegally. They're just not challenged. They're not arrested. But interestingly, in a society where the freedoms to protest and protest angrily, the freedoms to do that are protected by the very propositions of the
mean, those
Declaration of
die-ins-
Independence that they haven't learned.
That's right. Are those die-ins, are they interfering with the legislative process? Or if you're blocking the hallways, if you're yelling, if you're trying to intimidate versus being outside, you're inside protesting? I mean, this selective outrage and this selective prosecution is wrong. That's not what we're supposed to. That's not fundamental fair play. That's not due process. And that's not equal justice under the law. That's what it represents. Is equal justice under the law. I understand that it's run by people, and people that wrapped in flesh are flawed. And so every system is only as good as the people and the integrity and the ideology that runs it. And so there's a lot there. I don't know if you have any questions. I know we like to stay within 45 minutes.
The one question that, I mean,
We'll
it's
wrap up.
related, not related, but Ira says, do you think we are headed for civil war? I mean, literally, as I fear words are falling on deaf ears.
Been headed if this keeps going, what's the answer?
Yep.
You have 400 million guns, or billion, right? 400 billion, 330 billion people in this country, right? There's more guns than million, right? Sorry.
100 million.
I was thinking about debt. I'm thinking about Ukraine. I mean, all the billions. We throw numbers around. See how it's confusing?
So
it is?
true. You're
But
so
think
right.
about
You're
that.
right.
I mean, so 330 million people. There's 400 million guns in this. I mean, how are you going to get those away? By the way, not that you should. I'm just saying you're not going to get those away. And think about that. If we have 400 million guns, and we don't have just complete anarchy, that tells you that the vast majority of people are responsible with those 400 million guns. It's only the illegal or the deranged that you have to worry about.
You never hear that.
Never. It's the illegal and the deranged. They're the problems. It's not the law-abiding citizen. And this is the only issue. That's like saying, hey, Karen, you enjoy a glass or two of wine, right? Every once in a while? Okay, but because Fulano over here abused wine, I'm taking wine away from you.
Right.
Well, why don't you take it away from Fulano? He's the one that screwed it up. I mean, I didn't do anything with the wine. It's not my fault. I mean, Fulano's the one that drove the car like an asshole. Don't take my car away. I mean, do you understand my point?
Yeah,
We don't do that with any other
absolutely.
issue. We do that here. So all that to say.
By
so
the way, I don't drink cheap wine, and because of Biden, I can't afford the good stuff, so I just don't
No.
drink anymore.
Well, there you go.
It's horrible. My life is horrible.
Why don't
That's
you
why
go
I'm so
Laverne and
grumpy.
Shirley and just mash some grapes. I'm aging myself. Laverne and Shirley. Anything else? Comment?
Just a caution. These are people who are steeped in violence. They're okay with that. I wish I could say
Today's what? Trans Vengeance Day in D.C.
That-
right, which
Scared
was ultimately
me.
at the last minute
Yeah.
canceled.
Oh, it was canceled?
Oh,
Yes.
It was
okay.
canceled.
From what I understand, it was ultimately canceled.
Oh,
yes.
We
good.
didn't get the memo. We didn't get the
I
memo.
didn't
And
get it.
ironically, the premise upon which it was canceled is interesting. It's also a flat out lie that they were concerned about violence against trans. Think about that for a moment. That mentally
Trans
contorted logic.
Vengeance Day.
Right. They were concerned about
Wow.
violence against. Okay, whatever. This is unfortunately what we're dealing with, and it's not just a contingent within the Democrat Party. It happens to be the one that has a lot of political power right now, and you've got elected leaders. You even have former attorneys general of the United States and Eric Holder, who is an absolute revolutionary who pushes this bullshit. I pulled up. You remember the For the People Act again in 2021, where they were trying to federalize elections and take power away from the 50 state legislatures, which was what the founders had instituted to prevent corruption of elections. And so while they were trying to pass that, it failed, thank goodness. You remember there were Democrat leaders who were actually protesting all over the country. And some of it was pretty boisterous. And I remember Rachel Maddow had interviewed Eric Holder, and it's interesting what she had said. She teed him up. She goes, "What do you make of the direct action strategy that is being brought by voting rights activists?" Obviously, Vice President Harris and President Biden are very much in support of the reforms like the For the People Act, and they've advocated for it. We know that. We've heard all the speeches, and we know their positions. But yet you're seeing increasingly relentless focus. That's all the Democrat leaders who were protesting. We're seeing relentless focus by moral leaders, she calls them, getting arrested at the Senate office building, at the Supreme Court, at the White House, etc. And here's what Holder said. He said protesters, he applauded them and said protesters need to be in the streets. They need to get arrested. They need to be in the political fight over voting laws. Power concedes nothing without demand.
That's Eric Holder?
Yes.
So he's telling people to violate
Yes.
the law and get arrested, not to protest.
We need to raise the consciousness of people by demonstrating, by getting arrested, by doing the things, and this is where they confuse things on purpose, that ended segregation. As if the things that ended segregation was that.
Yeah, that wasn't.
Citizens need to be calling representatives to demand the kind of change that will make this country more representative, make our democracy more fair. So get arrested, break laws, hit the streets. They're baiting a confrontation. We got to be smart. True constitutional democracy, a true constitutional republic, and we are a constitutional republic, Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, demands that we're patient.
Yep.
You have to let the rule of law. You got to submit yourself to the rule of law and be patient, and we can outsmart them. That doesn't mean we back down from a fight. No. And no, I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about if somebody gets in your face, you get in their face right back. You fight an argument with another argument. But they're not making arguments, so it should be a lot easier.
Yeah.
And we can't be afraid. That's Nico always comes back to this, and I'm so glad you do. It's not just about having information. It's about being courageous. Go ahead.
I did see one thing yesterday that I wanted to mention, and I was like blown away. And that is at the corner of 281 and Hildebrand, right by Incarnate Word High School and Incarnate Word. A man and a woman, one holding a Trump flag, the other holding the American flag.
Wow.
And I was like, those guys have courage.
Wow.
Those guys are brave.
No kidding.
And
Behind plexiglass, I'm glad.
No,
Really
out
thick plex.
holding the flag, holding the Trump flag. And I thought,
Look,
wow,
and we
that's
gotta talk
crazy.
about this.
Yeah,
It's not about Trump.
I know.
This is really way
I know.
past Trump. Everybody's, Trump.
He's at the tip of the spear.
I mean, that's
he is
it.
right now.
That's right. We're all, he's just, I mean, like him or not, look, his numbers are going to go up. He's going to be the nominee. No doubt about that. There's some theories that the Democrats want him.
Especially now. Right?
Yeah, because they think he's beatable. They want another rematch. I don't know if that's the case, especially if all election laws are in place and everybody's out there and people are understanding.
I'm with you. I'm skeptical of that
You
too.
know, but that's a theory. I mean, I get it. You can share that theory, but it's not about Trump. Like to tell people, it's not about Trump. You can say I can't stand Trump, but still, support what he's doing, fighting against this communistic overtake. I mean, and that's ultimately what he's doing. Look, his style is interesting. He irritates the crap out of me many times. I've viewed those. I've expressed those frustrations, and so has George on this show. But it's hard to question his courage, his resolve. His motivations. That's between him and
his
God.
love for the country.
That's what it is.
It appears to be.
He loves country.
I mean, I don't know his heart, but everyone around him seems to say the same thing. People that know him seem to really like him. They seem to, and there seems to be this deep loyalty. Every strength taken to an extreme can be a weakness. And so this loyalty he demands from everybody else. But does he show it? I mean, I guess he does. I don't know. I'm not there checking off the marks and grading his homework on that. I think he's unreasonable sometimes. I think he's arrogant. All the things. I get it. He's a bull in a china store. I think he makes unforced errors when he doesn't have to. But he's fighting a very important fight. And whether people like it or
And what
not.
did he say at that rally? He said, they're after you.
Exactly.
I'm just in. Yeah.
And
I mean, look, that's becoming
accurate
more and more
statement.
true. It's
Yeah.
becoming more and more
It's an
true. That's
accurate
why
statement.
he doesn't have to go after Ron DeSantis. He doesn't have to go. I mean, Ron's numbers have gone down. He didn't have to go after Nikki. He didn't have to go after anybody. Just say they're coming after you through me. Look, I was right here. I was right here. This is not right. Forget me. This is about really you. Because if they can do this to me, they can do this to you. I'd keep it about that. He doesn't have to attack one other person. Doesn't have to call anybody names. This is not the 2016 election. Stick to the real issues.
We know he will. But he doesn't have to.
He doesn't have to. I'm still going to make my advocacy points. He can do what he wants. He's not listening to Nico LaHood in San Antonio, Texas. He didn't give a crap about me. But that's my 2 cents. But guys, well, thank you. Is that we can wrap up,
Done.
Karen?
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Thanks
for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the exercise in critical thinking. Share this with someone that you think may benefit from it, and we really appreciate not only your view, but also your support. Consider doing that if you can. God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend and happy. Well, we'll talk to them before Resurrection
Yes,
Day,
next
so
Saturday.
Enjoy Holy Week. I hope you get a lot out of it.